evening, ladies and gentlemen. So lovely to see you all here in this lovely, cosy, intimate atmosphere to this special Euronews event brought to you, of course, in partnership with ASIA. I'm Maeve McMahon. I'm a journalist with Euronews based here in Brussels, and I'm delighted to be with you here tonight for a very exciting event about a very pertinent question, recharging the debate. Are EVs just for rich men? A question and a debate we're having on a very historic day, of course, in the news cycle, with a very rich man just getting re-elected as the 47th President of the United States. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later during the cocktail. But first, let me tell you what is in store, and also say hello to all our viewers as well on YouTube who are joining us for the next 60 minutes. So we'll have some data and on some consumer trends when it comes to EVs. We'll also have a panel debate, which will be hosted by my colleague, Euronews' Jeremy Fleming-Jones, who's with us here. He's the head of EU policy. He'll be joined up here on stage by the Slovenian MEP, Zala Tomacic, and also by ASIA's Maria Linkova-Nic, that's the head of policy and strategy. And also he'll have a sociologist up here with him on stage, Tommaso Pardi. After that, I'll have the opportunity to sit down with Mr. Alexander Ver, who's with us here as well. We're delighted to hear from you. You're, of course, the president and the CEO of BMW Belux. For those of you in the room, you might have noticed on your way in lots of interesting things downstairs. That's the future experience. It will be here in Place Lux for the next couple of weeks. You'll have a unique opportunity after this discussion to test it and take a look. And then, as I said, there will be a cocktail and a networking moment for us all to chat and get together. But first, without further ado, let's bring up Maria Linkova-Nic, the Executive Head of Policy and Strategy here at ASIA. Welcome, Maria. Take a seat. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah. So, you've been looking into this question, recharging the debate. What evidence do you have for us that shows that just rich men are able to afford EVs?
Yes. So earlier this year, there was a very interesting research published by the European Alternative Fuels Observatory into consumer attitudes. And there was one finding that really caught my attention. So basically what they found is that a typical driver of a battery electric vehicle is a man aged between 35 and 55. He lives in a detached house. He has a medium income, and he has a high degree diploma. On the opposite, a typical non-battery electric vehicle driver is a woman. She lives in an apartment block. She has the same income, so this is not an income issue, but she also has secondary school diploma. And that really prompted us to think about consumer preferences and consumer attitudes when it comes to going electric, because what we see at the moment is lack of consumer demand. The market has been stagnating since early 2024, which obviously brings into the question, why aren't consumers interested in buying electric? And is there indeed any generational, gender, geographical divide that we need to discuss to push forward with the transition?
Just looking in the room here at our audience, hands up who drives an EV? Just one man. Or else people are just a little bit shy. Yeah. Yeah. So we have three, and yourself.
Yeah.
So two women and two men, so completely going against what our study says. But of course, we're in a different group here in Place Lux in Brussels. But interesting when it comes to consumer demand, with very few people in the audience actually driving one. There's a number of reasons for that, which we'll get into a little bit later with Mr. Ver. But of course, I work for Euronews, so I work in a newsroom. We've seen a lot of coverage in the press lately pointing to this weak consumer demand, especially in Germany. Why do you think that is?
So indeed, since, as I said, the beginning of this year, we've seen a gradual decrease in demand, and it's not picking up. And that's probably due to the fact that, of course, in some countries like Germany, but also France, the subsidies to purchase electric vehicles have been stopped. But the situation is also consistent across almost all EU countries. The only countries where we see still some progressive, consistent demand are Denmark and the Netherlands. But the rest is really not improving. And the situation is also consistent for all brands, all manufacturers. So you cannot really say that this is just an issue for European producers. Also in the UK, Switzerland, we observe the same trend. And of course, that sends a really worrying signal because it looks like it's not just a short-term glitch, a dip in the market and it's about to rebound, but it could be and it is probably a signal of a much more serious problem that obviously we need to solve because we've got only 10 years until 2035. We want to be 100% zero emission by that date. And if we are almost 2025 and we're still struggling even to grow the market to 15%, so how are we going to reach the 100% target in 10 years? And that's the question that we are obviously now raising with policymakers, asking them to look seriously into that issue so that we could put this transition back on track.
And policymakers, of course, have been on a bit of a pause for the last few months. Of course, we've had elections here in Europe. Just this week, we have the commissioner hearings, of course, so it'll take time for policymakers to kick off and be comfortable with their files and actually then be able to take decisions. Just finally, Maria, what are the barriers now when you look at the market when accessing electric vehicles?
Yeah, so what we see now is this, let's say, transition from early adopters to mass market, right? So, and it's true for all technology, not just electric vehicles. And it's usually, when you move from innovators and early adopters, then you have early majority. This is where you're going to talk about mass market. And this shift, it's usually at 16% of the market. It has been, this tipping point has been reached and exceeded in only 8 EU countries. Not surprisingly, all of them either have a very dense infrastructure, like Denmark and the Netherlands, or they have a very effective tax incentives for buying vehicles, like, for example, in Belgium. So that, it again confirms, I think, the key finding is that if there is no infrastructure, if there is no incentive, there is no transition.
And of course, price plays a big role too, but we'll come back to that a bit later with Mr. Ver. Maria, you're going to stay right where you are, here up on stage. I'm going to step down into the audience. I'm going to invite Jeremy Fleming-Jones, Euronews' EU policy chief, to come up here on stage. We'll also be inviting Tommaso Pardi, CNRS researcher at the École Normale Supérieure de Paris-Saclay, sociologist. We're going to get you chairs, don't worry. And also our MEP, Slovenian MEP Zala Tomasic from the European People's Party, who's also here to enlighten us. So thank you so much for being our panellists. We'll get you some seats and take it away. Jeremy, get down here. Oh, your mic? Okay.
Thank you, May, for that introduction. And obviously, we've already heard there the subtext for this debate on whether or not EVs are just for rich men. That is this recent research, this consumer monitor, revealing that women were not the EV market and men were. And I'm going to start by going to our MEP guest, Zala, unusually perhaps, because I understand, Zala, that you have some personal connection to the car market. And I wanted you to just explain a little bit about that and how you see the EV market figuring within that picture.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for inviting me. Welcome, everyone. So I am involved in the automotive industry, partially because my partner works in it and his family, so I have direct insight. So whatever happens here, then I get, a text, and then I can present the censored version to more people of that text. So when it comes to EVs, I would say that we already have heard good overview, but we need to put things in context. When we're talking about why are women not buying EVs, we have to understand that the EV market is, firstly, not a big market, is not a flourishing market. So also men are not buying it as much as they're buying the vehicles that use fossil fuels. So that's the first thing. We're already talking, I think that the current number is that in the European Union, there's 8% of EVs, 99% still use fossil fuels. But secondly, when I was preparing for this, I was talking and just thinking about women in my life, and what brought me to the conclusion that if I take my mom, for example, she works 8 hours a day. She has 3 kids. Now we're obviously grown up, but when we were kids, she wouldn't have time to charge an EV that she would be able to afford. The smaller EVs or the cheaper EVs have a smaller range. So when she had work, she has to drive to work, back, then drive me, to a bunch of practices, my sisters to a bunch of practices. It's just impractical for her, and I imagine for a lot of women, because they do tend to take this responsibility of driving children around a little bit more than men. So that is just one reason. The second one is that was actually brought to me by a couple women I was talking, is that especially in larger cities or even in rural areas, some of the charging stations are not lit, and they feel unsafe at night standing there for 20 to 30 minutes. And I think that's a very interesting point. I haven't even thought about it, but that is also perhaps one of the reasons. But the third, and I think the most obvious one, and something that we just cannot not talk about, and it was mentioned before, I think, is affordability. Women also tend to spend less on cars. There are many reasons for that, but I think men are more willing to open their wallets when it comes to that, and EVs tend to be more expensive. But overall, that's also, what we talked about, the reason why the EV market is not happening, and we heard it, and I agree with that mostly it is fueled by subsidies. So when you remove the subsidies, we saw what is happening. The market kind of crashes. And another interesting point is just that there's no market really for used EVs. Their value falls substantially faster than with fossil fuel cars. If I give an example, I heard there was a woman who bought, this was some time ago, Renault Zoe, the electric one. It was, I think at that time, when she bought it, worth around 30,000 euros, then with subsidies less. And then I think 2 years later, she was trying to sell it, and she didn't even get 4,000 euros for it, which is a huge decrease, for example. And that definitely plays a role when you're thinking about a car, because, a car is a big expense for people. This is not something that you would just go one day and say, you know what, I'm going to buy a new car. Usually people do some research about it. They look into it. They care about what they get for money. And this is definitely, a part, I would say, that we also as policymakers have to think about when we are proposing regulations. Sorry, I think this is kind of my main 3 points, but like I said, it all comes back to affordability.
Right, and you put that in personal context as well, so we can see how it impacts on in the market. Now, Tommaso, you are uniquely positioned as both a sociologist and a consultant in the auto sector to have some observation on this, both on this gendered issue on the affordability of cars. But also, I understand that you've just very recently published some research on the structural issues affecting the EV market and why they may not be reaching as many people in the market in general and women in particular. So perhaps you could explain to us a little bit about what your findings revealed.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy, for this question. And hello to everybody. I'm very happy to be here. This is a very important debate, I think. Now, my first take on this data is that it tells more about what is currently, to a certain extent, wrong with the electric cars we have in Europe, rather than it is wrong about women's attitudes towards electric cars. And let me be clear about that. Let me explain a little bit. In 2023, the average, and I emphasize average, battery electric vehicle sold in Europe weighed around 2 tons and cost around 66,000 euros. Now, clearly, this is a car for rich men. I mean, there is no doubt about that. Not only just a car for rich people, but also a car that women are not attracted to because we are talking about a big electric SUV. And we know from several statistics that women tend to buy smaller, lighter, and less affordable cars than men. And as it was just mentioned, there are several reasons to that. For instance, when you look at leisure trip, long distance trip, when people take car for motorways, the kind of trip that we see in the advertisement for new cars. Well, these type of trips, 80% of the time, are made by men. When we look at domestic work-related trips, what we were talking about before, this is the only type of trips that are made predominantly by women, 75% of the time. And so what is the most rational choice for this kind of trips? A small, old cars. That's what we see predominantly owned by women who do this free job. This is not a job you get paid for. And this is the most rational choice. It's cheap to buy, cheap to use, easy to drive, easy to park. You don't need to drive this car fast and not on long distance. Now, do you see in the current electric market a car that will replace this type of cars that currently are old Fiat Punto, or Twingos, or Clios, or Peugeot 107? Do you see an electric car that will replace this car in 5-10 years when they will need it? No, we don't see this type of cars in the electric market. And even when women buy new cars, and they do, they tend to prefer small cars, even smaller cars that we were talking about, really what used to be the city cars that is vanishing from the European market, like Micra, Toyota Aygo, Peugeot 107, these women predominantly buy and own this type of cars. And part of the reason is that big SUVs are still advertised and mainly sold to men. 80% of big SUVs are bought by men nowadays. So it's not surprising that since the electric car is statistically more associated with this type of vehicle, we do not see women attracted to that. And I think this is a problem, because women actually buy the most rational car, and the cars that are the most energy efficient, and also the cars that are the less dangerous on the road. I don't know if many people know that, but only 20% of road fatalities are actually made by women. 80% are made by men. Or the famous Italian phrase, woman at the wheel, constant danger, is not just a myth, it's just absolutely wrong. A young man with big cars is the most dangerous driver you can find. So the fact that electric cars do not appeal to women, I think is a problem. So I go back to my first statement. Because it means that, well, we have too big electric vehicles, and we need to democratize the access to electric vehicles if we want to move over all the problems that we were talking about before. And indeed, in this report we just made, we tried to, together with some colleagues in France, we tried to address this issue. Why we don't not have affordable electric vehicles in the market? And this goes back to the question of why affordable small vehicles are disappearing, even in the ICE market. How many car makers have stopped producing small cars in the last days because they're not profitable anymore? And I think one of the findings that I would like to put in the discussion is that the increasing uncoordinated regulatory pressures. So we have several different DGs in charge of very important regulation with very reasonable and important targets like 0 deaths on the road, 0 CO emission from car, more connectivity, more recyclability. But these DGs do not talk to one another. They don't have an holistic view. So each one is reasoning all things equal. This is a good measure to push forward. But the other DGs do the same, and eventually what converge on car makers is a very challenging task of including a lot of new technologies that make cars more expensive, heavier. And that push the cars in the wrong direction. We need, if you want to decarbonize transport, even with an electric car, we need rather smaller cars, less heavier cars. The carbon footprint of an electric vehicle is an important issue and is almost proportionally to mass. So in this report, we suggest to create a new category, like, for example, the K cars in Japan, that will be capped in mass, power, and dimension, and will prevent this upmarket grift. And also, we propose to attach to this new category an eco score with a carbon footprint, so that consumers know what is a very green and what is a less green electric cars. And these also will help states to deploy all these policies that we need to support electric deployment, but also to focus on these issues of affordability, so to promote smaller but also more affordable cars. And we hope ultimately that this measure would help to reconcile European citizens with the electric car, because this is another issue. Currently, we're seeing with the last European election that many parties that were clearly displaying their willingness to stop the transition actually won the election. So that is the proposal. And so my message is, let's make electric cars more appealing to women, because that is the right way to go forward.
Right. Well, thanks very much for that. Maria, from the perspective of industry, does all of this chime true that the supply of the type of electric vehicles that might appeal to women in the market that were identified as not being in the market is simply not there? I mean, is that your experience? And do you think that is that changing at all? Is there anything on the horizon?
So I think Tommaso rightly said average price of the vehicle is 66,000. So indeed, that needs to be put in the perspective. There are affordable models available on the market. In fact, if you look at the whole list of all models that are on the EU market, you see 370 battery electric vehicles. It's a 30% increase compared to last year. So the manufacturers are bringing models on the market, and there are also now, I think, about 10 or more in the budget category, so below 30,000. Also, we've got quite a few models coming later this year or early next year, even that are going to retail at 25,000 euros. So affordable vehicles are coming. So this is no longer, I think, a problem of supply. So the supply is either there or will be there very, very soon. But when talking about affordability, I think it was also important to understand that the price of an electric battery vehicle is going to be always more expensive than the price of internal combustion engine, simply because the costs of battery manufacturing are larger than that of an internal combustion engine, which of course has to do with energy costs, with raw materials costs. I'm talking about small electric vehicles. For example, a battery is accountable for 40% of all material costs in a small vehicle. So this is why it is challenging to produce, let's say, a truly affordable electric vehicle. And the huge efforts have been made really to do that. But we need to just keep in mind that battery production is not cheap. And unless we have a breakthrough very soon in battery chemistry and we'll be able to manufacture batteries at the lower costs, this is probably going to stay there. This is why it is important to continue with purchase fiscal incentives to really equalize, let's say, the costs of using purchasing and using electric vehicles compared to combustion engine. But another point I think that is really interesting in that research, I mean, we now talk about men and women, but you remember that woman in the research lives in an apartment block, which means that she does not have access to private charging. And this is also important because the studies show that those users of electric vehicles that have access to private charging can usually profit from from cheaper electricity, whilst if this woman lives in an apartment block, she probably needs to use public charging. First, she needs to find this, which is not always easy. And second, the price of electricity in public infrastructure is much more expensive than the private one. So this is also the question of making electricity prices affordable for electric vehicle users, because otherwise, with more than 50% of all EU households living in apartment blocks, we're really making this very difficult for them to find electric vehicles attractive, even regardless of the initial purchase price.
Okay, well, you've talked there briefly about incentives, but I just wanted to go back to Tommaso, because you talked about regulation from a different perspective, about these different departments which are imposing regulatory bundles onto the automakers, which make it more affordable for them to make larger models. And I wondered if you could explain a bit about what you were talking about there. Which types of regulation do you think are pushing the car market into the top end of the market?
Okay, so this is an historical process that has not started yesterday. It's been in place since the early 1990s. So in the report, for example, we make a study on the Clio, which is a car that has been first put on the market in the early 90s with the Clio 1. And then we move up until the Clio 6 that will be on the market next year. And we found out that around 500 kilograms have been added to the Clio during these 30 years, more or less. And that is 60% more of mass. And if you consider the priority we had during this period, reducing CO2 emission and increasing road safety, this is not really the way to go because, of course, heavy cars consume more fuel and emit more CO2 emissions, and when they eat other objects are more dangerous and cause more fatalities. And when we look at the regulation in play, we had initially a lot of passive safety measure, then more active safety measure, then the depollution of the engine with the Euro norms, but also the simultaneously pressure on CO2, which was contradictory because it was pushing the car towards getting bigger. And the problem we see here is that nobody was thinking, well, these cars are getting bigger, heavier, and more expensive, and this is not what we would like to see. We would like to see the opposite. Why this is happening? Should do something about coordinating this different regulation so that the end result is what we're looking for: greener, more affordable, more energy-efficient cars. And this has not been happening. So we have also made interviews with experts within car makers in order to understand how this is evolving. And now with active safety measure, the famous ADAS, there is a new wave of regulation that is coming. There are new wave of regulation that are coming for the materials and for all these kind of things. And of course, it's much easier to digest the cost of this regulation when you produce 40,000, 50,000 cars. Often these cars, these premium cars, they also have this technology already in place, because consumers of these cars are ready to pay more for have more safety, more active measures. But when you're forced to do that on very small cars, either the cars get much bigger, as I just say with the Clio, so it's not anymore the same cars 20 or 30 years later, and it's not the same price, and it's not the same consumers, or simply stop manufacturing that. It's not profitable anymore. A middle solution is that I replace the site of production. I don't produce anymore that in Italy or France or Spain, and I go to Central Eastern European country, Turkey or Morocco, which also has an impact on the workers and on the national industry. So we thought that all this dynamic is not really what we need. And with the electric cars, of course, that was just said, you take a normal car like that, the car that is the result of this evolution, you add 400, 500 kilograms of battery, rather bigger batteries than smaller because of the recharging problem. So you give more autonomy to consumer to persuade them to buy this car. And you get these 2-ton cars, which is, I mean, of course we need in the market also 2-ton SUV because eventually they make SUV much greener than the current ICE car. There is no doubt about that. But if this is the average European car, then we have a problem. And that's the fundamental message of the research
Can
that
I
you just
add
made.
something?
Sure, Zala, please.
Very shortly. Well, I think that the trend is now that, and well, I can get immediately fact-checked on this because we have a BMW representative here. And I think BMW is already doing that you don't have specific electric car models, but that you have one model and then you can choose the engine type. You can decide for a hybrid, electric, diesel, or petrol. So it's no longer that you have this and this and this is offered for fossil fuels and this is for electric. I think this is the trend all across the automotive industry. So it's not going to be this separation of models regarding their engine type.
Okay, thank you, Zala. I want to stay with you actually because I know that you represent the European People's Party, the largest group in the Parliament, and at the moment you are on a team within that group who are looking at the electric vehicle issue and grouping together the party's thoughts on how your policy should develop towards it. And I know that is something that you can't really give us any details about at the moment because it's at an early stage. But I wondered if you could at least tell us what the sort of trade-offs in this sector are. What are the controversial issues that the politicians are having to weigh up? Because I mean, one of them has already been touched upon, the Green Deal and the kind of incentives that go along with the Green Deal. But perhaps you could give us a view from the inside the Parliament.
For sure. Well, it's not that much a team. It's just, the MEPs that are in respective committees. For example, I'm in ITRE right now. Obviously, we're coming to a common stance and understanding. But yeah, so I think there's no secret what's happening with the European automotive industry. If you just look at Germany with the closing of Volkswagen factory, then Audi, I think in Belgium, you know, like we're in a crisis. This is where we are. And I also think it's going to be very interesting to see how now the election of Donald Trump is going to play on that, because if we're talking about competitiveness, he is definitely going to put America first. So it's going to be interesting what happens with that, also in regards to China. But just to come back to the EU. So here are my own views. I don't think we can keep on putting more and more regulations onto the car manufacturers without providing the necessary environment for them to sell EVs. So I think this is what is happening right now. So I talked to representative in the automotive industry, and we can see that they have made shifts. They have invested a lot of money into the green transition. But if they cannot sell EVs, because we've heard, the market for EVs is just right now, it's not there. We cannot keep on punishing them because people can't either afford the EVs and are not buying them, or for, like we heard, electricity prices are high. For example, I drove the other day a hybrid. I charged it at a public infrastructure charging, and it was 15 euros for 100 kilometers. I would never pay that much in gas. So obviously for an average citizens, they do think about these things. So I think that the big thing, that everyone is asking about right now is that next year the CO2 regulation is gonna, right now I think that it's gonna decrease by 16%. Well, yeah, so so I think right now it's 100. It's set to 115, and it's going to go down to 93.6 grams per kilometer. And the European brands are saying they're not going to be reaching these targets, and then they're going to be. They are going to be faced. They're already paying penalties, but starting from next year, it's going to be even more. And that money could instead, in my opinion, go into their own research and development of the things instead of paying the penalties. So I think this is one thing that we're going to be discussing in the Parliament. I'm not saying what's going to happen, but I do think it's going to be a big discussion. Then also, I think we're going to see in this mandate definitely a lot of talks regarding the 2035 ban, what's going to happen with that. I also want to emphasize that we should really invest, and this was what Draghi said in his report, we should be investing into research, into innovation, and just let the market do its job. Maybe electric vehicles are the way to go, but maybe we develop some new technology or something better comes along that also can provide, can also help us reach the climate, the carbon targets. It doesn't have to be EV. Right now, we're really, sorry, I know I'm long, forcing into something else, but we should let, in my opinion, the market decides, let them give opportunities to develop. I think they are moving into the right direction. I think the automotive industry has definitely made the shift. They are thinking about this, but right now they need more time to reach the targets.
Okay, thanks for that, Zala. Maria, just coming back to you, we heard there from Zala that the auto industry is being pushed at one side to fulfill these climate obligations, while at the other side is being asked to provide supply of EV vehicles. What's your perception from the industry perspective of what they want out of those, how they want to balance those things? I mean, do you have the perception that some are simply trying to drive down that 2035 obligation, which seems to be around the corner, or at the same time, are they trying to weigh and work out how their EV landscape can be made easier? Is there a balance between the two or not?
Yes, well, first of all, I think what's happening now, and this is really important, is this realization that this is not a supply issue. This is really also a demand issue, and we urgently need to work on demand at the moment because the supply is there. And so that's already an important point, because that's indeed, I think, the onus has been on manufacturers over the past few years. Now we really need to ensure that consumers are also on board with this transition. I think this is why we're having this conversation at the moment. I think there's no question that European manufacturers, the members of ASEA, are fully committed to the decarbonization. Investments have been made. 250 billion have been invested. All those vehicles are on the market. We want this transition to take place, but of course, it's not just about manufacturers, it's all other conditions, the infrastructure that we just heard about, the prices of electricity, the prices of batteries, competitive manufacturing environment in Europe, because it's more expensive to produce vehicles, any vehicles, in Europe than elsewhere. So all these topics, also the regulatory framework, as Tommaso rightly pointed out, all these things, they need to be to work in sync for the transition to happen. And indeed, in this situation, it is unfair to obviously put all the emphasis on manufacturers that have done their job. They put the vehicles on the market, but those vehicles, the consumers are not interested in buying them. So we expect, and we're looking at, of course, the next European Commission, the member states really now look at the demand side and to fix all these underlying problems with infrastructure and incentives.
Many of the things that you describe on the demand side, infrastructure, incentives, seen from another country, they might look like subsidies. And indeed, they perhaps are some of the subsidies that the Europeans have decided that the Chinese are pumping into their own EV market and have resulted in tariffs. Now, in the current climate, with Donald Trump now re-elected in America, tariffs probably around the corner again on that front. This sector is headed for a trade war, is it not, Tommaso?
We are already in a sort of trade war, because even the Biden administration had erected huge barriers against China imports, that they were first and then Europe has followed, I think, rightly to a certain degree, because otherwise we could have been overwhelmed by imports of Chinese electric cars. Imports from China already represent 1/4 of the electric vehicle market in Europe, and I think we cannot really afford to have much more than that. But at the same time, this is a really tricky question, because we need raw materials from China, the refined raw materials. Otherwise, it's just impossible to get the 2035 target at the current configuration. We don't have a battery value chain in Europe. We need to build it. We need their technologies, because they're better right now in making battery electric vehicles. They started earlier. They're much more stronger state support. I think, so that is the question that is also on the table. Should we slow down because we don't have the money? We see the states that have budgetary problems, and Mario Draghi came with this provoking report saying, well, Europe should get the money, should get that, and these are not subsidized. These are investment in the future. It's not taking debt. It's creating an industry that will be competitive and will provide jobs and will conquer markets. So this is the question, and China has really given this example. So the trade war is a problem, in particular, I believe, for a country like Germany, that is the strongest European country from the automotive perspective. It concentrates more than 50% of the value added in the automotive industry. So it is the main exporter of cars. And so we need to protect also the interest of Germany, not also the interest of all the other countries. So we need to balance all these things. And I think what is lacking, and I hope it will come out of this second Green Deal, I hope there will be a second Green Deal, it's a clear vision of how we deal with all these problems. So it's industrial policies, roadmap strategies about all these issues. How we create a battery value chain so we become more autonomous on these issues and we guarantee access to raw materials. How do we deal with the Chinese, not only with barriers, but with partnership? Because we need also to work with them in order to make this happen. We do not forget, we are still producing millions of vehicles in China. There are a lot of European car makers that are there, and they're making profits there. So I think we have to make this deal, and we need to bring electric vehicles to the market in bigger volumes. So we need fiscal policies. It cannot be that each state decides what to do. This uncoordinated way of doing it creates a lot of uncertainty. So we need a sort of agreement and steady support. Otherwise, we have a stop-and-go market, and it's very difficult for car makers to meet the targets. All of these things should be on the table, and we should come up with something that should have been there at the beginning, an industrial policy, a strategy, not just only targets and regulations. But it's not too late. So I think it's time to catch up with this.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that, Tommaso. I think we're really running out of time, so I wanted to just wrap up our brief debate by asking each of you, the new commission is obviously coming in. The hearings are still underway, but once that new commission is in December, if you had one ask of that commission, one thing that you think that they could do as a sort of preliminary measure to help boost this market or secure it, what would that be? Zala, maybe if I could go to you first.
Of course, so I'll be short. It would be to listen to the people, listen to companies, people's jobs. literally depends on what they're going to do.
Maria?
Yes. So the current market situation, so 13% market share, down from almost 15% last year, is a wake-up call. We have no time to lose. We need to start a robust, comprehensive review of the regulation already in 2025. We cannot wait until 2026. And we also need to look into the situation with the current, of course, disproportionate costs of compliance that are put on the manufacturers. Yes, that's indeed, as I think Zala said, people's jobs and lives depend on this. And yeah, we have no time to lose.
Tommaso?
Well, I do agree fully with what has just been said. I think it's not time to break. It's not time to change. I think it's time to move forward, but to realize that there were many more obstacles that we thought at the beginning, and it's time to address them. And policy, regulation at the European level first, but the national level too, in a coordinated way down to cities. All these different authorities need to play a role in this transition. And I think Mario Draghi really put very clear that these cost a lot of money. So budgetary austerity on this, it should not be on the agenda, because what is on the line is simply the future of the planet. Europe should stand as an example to all the other countries. And also, very importantly, we need to catch up with China. I think that would be an illusion. I mean, I don't know what will happen in the United States, but if they close down everything and they say, well, we just put the electric car aside and we will survive like that, I think that would be a very wrong bet, because this is clearly the technology of the future. I agree that there are other technological solutions in the transitions. That's possible. I'm not against this debate, but I think eventually the electric car will be the future. So the faster we move there and the stronger we are in this transition, the better it is, and the European Commission needs to play a central role in this, absolutely.
Okay, thank you all very much for your contributions, and please thank the panel for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for what was a rather pessimistic panel, as we probably expected. We weren't all here to get in a good mood today. I think that panel really set the scene for the challenges for the upcoming legislators over the next couple of years. And so depressing, really, to hear from Maria there about the supply, but not the demand out there. And of course, we'd now like to invite Mr. Alexander Ver up to the stage. Put your hands together for him. You can take a seat beside me there.
Thank you.
And I guess the first question, your reaction to what you heard there, any points that you would like to pick out? I mean, we heard Tommaso there at the end saying the future should be electric, but what would be your reaction to what you heard there?
I mean, first of all, I didn't see it as a pessimistic exchange. I saw it
realistic.
rather...
Realistic.
Yeah, I mean, everyone said that, okay, we should keep working on it, but there's definitely a way forward. That's the way how we see it. But I think the discussion has also shown that the problematic is multifaceted, and that, I mean, everyone needs really to pull together if we want to make this happen. I mean, we talk about a change that I think is comparable to changes like the industrialization. So we talk about a big change here. This is not incremental. So this is something where really all stakeholders need to pull together. It's the authorities, it's of course the car manufacturers, it's the industry, and it's even the consumer that at some point also needs to be a part of the equation. Also, I think the discussion shows it's also not black and white. I think Maria said the EV segment is shrinking, and that's true for the European total. It's not true for Belgium, for example. Yeah? Belgium has grown until the end of October, so last week, by 40%, 40% in electric vehicle sales, registrations, FEBIAC numbers from today, whereas the overall market has shrunk by 5%. So overall passenger car market -5%, overall EV +40%. So this shows transformation is happening. BMW was growing by 70%. So it shows that we're not only number one in the overall market, but we're also strong in the EV segment.
And just on Belgium, because indeed Maria did stress the Netherlands, she stressed Denmark. We've all read about the decrease in demand in Germany. But why in Belgium? Why are things looking good in Belgium?
I think it's a combination of facts. As you say, I mean, we see markets shrinking where we had very eclectic policy rulings and where subsidies eventually have been withdrawn from one day to another. So that's what is very difficult is for the economy and also for the consumer, by the way, is we need predictability. And that's what consumers need. They need predictability. They need to know what they buy into. And that would be also, of course, my appeal. But why is Belgium different? Belgium, I think, has a good mixture and a good blend, and most of all, a strong commitment to making the Green Deal happen. I mean, there is obviously, we know, a strong structural support which addresses what we call B2B, so the business-to-business sector. There is now temporarily also a financial subsidy in the northern and the Flemish part of the country, which is, let's say, with a limited success. So what we do see is that things start really to take off when all parties pull together. Financial subsidies, of course, they accelerate, because that's important also to acknowledge. When we look at Europe, there is not one Europe. The adoption rate is very different country by country. So the future is electric. The direction is clear. The speed is very different. So you see markets like Italy or Spain, which may have an EV share of 4 or 5%, and then you go up to markets like Belgium, which is in the month of October, by the way, above 30% EV share. And Holland, or the Netherlands, is at 40. So Belgium will be, and I hope reality will not prove me wrong, from next year on, Belgium will be the reference market of electromobility in Europe. And we can expect that roughly 2 out of 3 cars in the near future in Belgium will be electric. And this is not only, but also thanks, of course, to a predictable and structural and systematic support of, let's say, greening the fleet of the big fleet companies. So if we want to make this happen big time, then we have specifically to focus on the B2B business because this is where the magic happens. Of course, whenever we can afford giving subsidies, of course, to private consumers, highly welcome. But the big transformation will not come with private, because the industry also needs time to amortize and to realize scale economies. And I think that's something we have just to acknowledge. Innovation is coming by enterprises. Yeah? So that's a systematic that you also find in consumer electronics, is that innovation and economies of scale, they take time. With regards to prices, by the way, I mean, you may know not only BMW Group, but many of the car manufacturers have captives. And what we do offer, of course, is financing, is renting. So with that, we make cars a lot more affordable. We're offering a mini electric from 30,000 euro on a monthly rate at, let's say, 200. So it's a combination of factors of infrastructure, subsidies, And of course, having a proper offer, which I think with 370 vehicles being electric, I think this is overcome now in terms of there is a good offer in the marketplace.
So you're trying to switch and create more of an optimistic tone here at this discussion. But just to go back to the title of today's event, which is Recharging the Debate. Are EVs just for rich men? Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't, of course. I mean, I don't know the study, I have to admit. I'm curious to look into, and I learned also from Sara and Maria and Tommaso, of course, interesting aspects to consider about the charging and stuff.
And practical challenges.
I would not be convinced to say that there is really a positive correlation between ethnicity or gender and drivetrain. What we do see, yes, is that electric consumers tend to be younger. They tend to come from an urban environment, which would speak a bit against, I think, the problematic of home charging, which definitely is one. It is one. But in general, what we see is, and I mean, let's face it, 80% of this will happen in the B2B market. The B2B market makes roughly 70% of the Belgian passenger car market, and with that you can assume that from now on any company with a VAT number, be it the small business, the dentist around the corner, be it let's say the lawyer with 5 or 10 associates, up to the big corporates of thousands of people, they will buy exclusively electromobility given the very clear commitment, let's say, of the local legislation. So this will mean that next year, the car park will be greened and electrified even more. And with that, to come back to your question on social demographics, the people driving electric will just be mirroring the Belgian population. Why? Because it will be mirroring the workforce of those companies where people will work. If at the end there is more aged white-haired men or women, I wouldn't know. But I would not see, let's say, systematic social demographic patterns at this point, except the ones that I pointed out. Because I think, Maria, you said it, gone are the times that we talk innovators only. We're actually now in early, even moving into late adopters. So now we're really talking you and me and everyone.
And of course, you're working for the group for 27 years. Is that right?
That's true, yeah.
And of course, you're not just selling cars, that's not your job, but also marketing. So how are you trying to target women and more diverse communities?
Now, first of all, we're trying not to sell electromobility as a boring technology. Of course, we do it for a reason that's very clear, but at the end, we're selling dreams and we're selling means to move from one point to another. And I think that's something also, individual mobility, that proves to be necessary in a country where public transportation may not come up to where it could be. I'm not quoting any country on these. But that, I think, is to be considered, that we sell technology in an emotional way.
And when you say you're selling a dream, describe that dream.
I mean, the dream is to have independence, to be independent and to be able to move your family. I mean, we many times talk about Europe. The whole discussion is about Europe, and to be honest, it's not about Southern Europe. It's about Central, eventually Northern Europe. I lived in Latin America for 12 years. To own a car is the biggest dream on earth. Yeah, to be able to bring your grandmother to whatever place, or to the hospital, whatever, or to it's a human right. That's what people say to that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not singing the automotive song here, but what I'm saying is that we're selling dreams, and when we talk drivetrain, we talk technology, and it will prove. And we have just this morning. Sorry, I talked to a customer, and she told me, Alex, I'm now in my 3rd electric vehicle. I will never go back. Because there's also, I think, studies about people returning from electric vehicles back to internal combustion. We don't see that. We see people who drive electric, they really fall in love with the rational aspect of things, but also with the driving characteristics and the fun it brings.
But there's a lot of fear. When we speak at Euronews, for example, to consumers, there's so much fear out there when it comes to charging stations, price, of course, affordability. How can you address that? What are the BMW Group doing to address that?
What we're doing in Belgium locally, and I'm inviting any one of you who would be interested, we're running this for a few months now, what we call Electric Driving Academy, where we indeed inviting people who are playing with the idea of getting into electric by taking fear away. Because I think it's exactly what you say, there is a lot of psychological burden. If we want this to fly, of course we cannot, it's not only about money and excessive affordability, it is also, but there is a lot of fear about how do I charge? I never done it before, so people shy away from it, yeah? And if you haven't done it, you cannot fall in love with it. So we do this Electric Driving Academy, where on each Saturday we would invite, I say, 50 people that play with this idea, not necessarily buying a BMW, that's not necessary, but we tell them, we explain about the technology, we explain about battery capacity, about range, we explain how to charge, so that's a whole, it's a promoting the culture of sustainable mobility, which we take not only, I mean, we don't want to only be a number one in volume, and of course it's nice to have, but we see ourselves also in a clear responsibility and commitment as a corporate citizen to support this big transformation. And this is a piece of it where we address psychology. And I've been there, I think, 2 weeks ago on one of those Saturdays, and I can tell you, I've seen a diversity in terms of gender, ethnicity, you name it. There's not only been, let's say, 50 or 60-year-old Caucasians, men sitting there. There was really a wide variety of people in a mirror of the population, I would say.
And I can see a lot of new participants here in the audience, with a lot of people nodding along with enthusiasm to perhaps try out one of those Saturday morning. But just to go back to the charging stations issues, this is pretty practical. The Netherlands have a lot, Denmark, but how can we have more? And Belgium too.
We do. It's just not this quantitative issue. We have 0.3 charging points per electric vehicle. We roughly have 220,000 electric vehicles in the car park in Belgium right now. We have 67,000 charging points, means 0.3. So we're on exactly the level as is the Netherlands. So the sheer quantity, one would say, is fantastic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The point is a bit the north-south allocation, which of course you can judge a lot better being Belgians. But let's say 95 or 98% of the charging points are in the Flemish part, including Brussels. And by the way, and this is real correlation, this is not a shine correlation, we're selling almost 90% of electric vehicles in that area where infrastructure is. So you do see a very strong positive correlation between financial subsidies. Take the example of Norway, take the example of Germany. It's not coming without a reason. Or take infrastructure. So at the end, of course, we can talk social demographics, but at the end, it's a transformation which is a global transformation where we are all in this together. And there we have to work is the structural elements. I think that's what we really have to work on.
And I know you're not the politician here, you're the ears and eyes on the market. Of course, as I said, you're in this industry for 27 years, you're with the group, but what has been your reaction to the presidential elections in the United States?
I mean, if I would say that I'm surprised, I think we wouldn't be a good global player about this, whatever the outcome is or will be. I mean, as you know, as a global player, we have a continuous strategy, a process where we always review what we may see coming down the road. So I think we've been working with U.S. administrations for many, many decades. We're a corporate citizen for more than 50 years in Spartanburg, South Carolina. So we will keep cooperating, of course, with the U.S. administration. I think Tommaso said it when you talk protectionism or whatsoever. That's not a trend that would be bound to this one person. I mean, that's a trend that we see all over the place, by the way, in Asia, in China, now also in Europe. And in the US also we've seen it. So whatever, let's say, the head of an administration is, of course, we're active in 140 countries, so we will adapt, of course. But let's say a general trend, independent from the US election, but I'm generalizing it on protectionist is not helping us, also not on bringing the transformation forward.
Okay, Mr. Alexander, thank you so much for being with us here. Round of applause.
Thank you very much.
So now, as promised, it's time to go downstairs for the future experience and then to come back up here once you get hungry and thirsty for the networking drink. Thank you so much. You've been a fantastic audience, and thank you to all those who came up on stage. And of course, thank you for watching, those of you who've been joining us on YouTube. Take care and good night.